Every year, millions of people leave their country to move to Europe in the hope of a new, better life. However, in this journey, they often come against challenges such as racism and social exclusion. This AMIF project opens up a new path for the inclusion of migrants, who, if they are embraced as valuable members of our communities, they can contribute to the welfare of the European Union as a whole.
A very warm welcome from my side to the last session of the webinar series, Rethinking Integration on a European Level. It's a very special day because now, together with all of you, for the past 13 sessions, we've been highlighting different perspectives on how we can and we should rethink integration. We talked about housing, about policy coherence. We opened up like many topics. Today, earlier in the morning, we talked about communication against stereotypes, and we end our workshop series with talking about gender, non-discrimination, and equal opportunities when we talk about integration. So I am very happy to welcome all of you on Facebook, online, in the audience that you joined this last session. We will focus on the topic of queer asylum and the specific experiences, challenges, and needs of queer refugees. As you know, this is supposed to be an interactive session, so I warmly welcome all of you to write your questions in the chat or to use the question and answer section or to just raise your hand. But I think after 13 sessions, this should be clear. For today, I welcome a very special moderator. So I have been moderating all the sessions. The last session today will be moderated by our ECHA Vice President, Daniel Čubelić, who will then take over and introduce you to the wonderful guests and speakers that we welcome today. Welcome, Daniel. Good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Yvier. Thank you so much for having me. In this last session, we want to talk about queer asylum. Lesbian, gay, trans, queer, and intersex people face very particular challenges when they decide to leave their countries and come to Europe as refugees or migrants. In this session, we want to discuss with our wonderful guests what is needed for queer refugees to have equal access to public services, to housing, to the labor market, what discriminations they face in the LGBTIQ community, and of course also in the general society. And particular attention will be paid to the opportunities and dangers of voluntary work in this field. So I'm very happy to welcome our three speakers for today. Olivia Babirye Nyangoma, pronouns she, her, a queer refugee activist advocating for the rights of lesbians and queer women. She was born in Uganda, fled to Germany, Munich in 2017, and waiting for court appeal hearing after her first application was rejected. So you see already some of the challenges we want to discuss today. She is supported by an organization called Letra, lesbian-based organization in Munich that offers counseling and social support to lesbian refugees, to lesbians in general, but also to lesbian refugees in Munich and in the wider area around Munich. She's also a member of an FLAIT, Solidarity Africa, a group of lesbians from Africa, mostly Uganda, connecting and exchanging under the Letra umbrella. And she's also an activist demonstrating and giving lectures on the life of lesbians in Uganda and also in Germany, for example, at the Catholic University of Eichstätt. Anbit Zaman, using all pronouns, is a Anbit, I have lost count on how many awards you just won in the last years. I have the feeling every 4 weeks it's another one. Very famous now human rights defender for LGBTIQ rights, and also a social justice warrior, working for many, many organizations in Germany, in Europe, from ILGA to now, for example, also working for queer refugees from Ukraine and so many other organizations. You can maybe explore this more in the next minutes. And we will also have, I'm very happy to have Dr. Mencha Celer, a professor at the moment in New York, and at the same time, founder of the Queer European Asylum Network. So the person who brought all this together here, a little bit the mother of that project, and an expert on how westernized conceptions of human rights affect the access of justice of minority groups at the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, and religion. She's at the moment research fellow also in Bristol and Brunel University in London, and led an EU-funded research project which examines the experiences of LGBTIQ asylum seekers, especially with Muslim background, within Germany's asylum system. So we will start with you, Olivia, and giving us an introduction about also a very personal introduction about your experiences. So Olivia, the floor is yours.
Olivia, your microphone is turned off.
Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm very glad to be here today and to talk about my personal experience as an LGBT lesbian living in Deutschland. I left my home country in 2017 in the month of April, and I arrived in Germany, where I have now stayed for, I would say, 5 years now. And living as a lesbian in Germany without being recognized is a little hard, and we find like a lot of challenges. I did my first, I would say I did my first interview that was on the 28th of June, 2017. And I had to wait for like 5 months and three weeks to receive my feedback, of which I did not receive that feedback direct to me. The day they sent my feedback was the day I was transferred from Munich, where I was currently living, to Gare Street in Wolfratshausen. So I missed my documents. I did not receive them. And after like a month, my ID, which is an Ausweis, had expired, and I had gone to the Landratsamt in Bad Hos for renewal. That is when I was asked if I had received those documents, but I had not received them. So those are the challenges that we meet as queer people and asylum seekers. Do I need to?
Yeah, Olivia, can you tell us a little bit more, especially, I mean, about you, for example, the situation, how you have access, for example, during the Corona crisis, and where you have especially obstacles, for example, the workforce, labor market, housing market, and what kind of discriminations you experienced, or what you would wish that could change.
Okay, I would start from the labor market. As soon as we arrive, like we are not allowed to work for actually, I think, a period of like 1 to 2 years. you cannot work in Deutschland. And many of the asylum seekers did not hand in their documents, including me. My passport got lost, and I went to police and I reported. I gave in a police report that my documents got lost. So since that time, I have not worked until last year in November, when I was allowed to begin looking for work, of which I was able to get it in January this year. And I started working in January. And currently my Ausweis is expiring on the 8th, but they have told me they are not renewing it unless I present a passport. So I think by next month, I'll not have a job. I don't know how long until I give in my documents. For housing, before I was transferred to Dere Street, we were staying in Munich in one big building whereby we were mixed, like one floor was for men and another floor was for ladies. And we were put in a room of like 8 people, 8 ladies. By then we were sleeping as only ladies. And then I was transferred to Dere Street, where I stayed for 2 years, and we were sleeping in a small room that was meant to be for one person. So we were sharing this room, and the only space we had was, I would say, on your bed. You would do everything on the bed. You had to put your belongings under the bed. Like, there was not much space in this room. And when Corona time came, it was quite hard because majority of people were home and majority of people were not working, and we were like mixing up, moving up and down. And in this building, we are mixed up, men and women. And men have many interests. Whenever they see a lady, they want to make sure they they get in touch with this person, or make them their friends or girlfriends or women and all that. So in this accommodation, there was one gentleman, I would say there was one gentleman. He was married, but he kept on coming to me and telling me, Olivia, I'm interested in you. I want you to be my woman. But I told him, you are a married man. Why are you looking for me? Secondly, I told him, I'm not interested. I was not ready. I'm not ready to be your friend. We can talk as people living together. That is, to me, I think that is being friends enough. But when Corona came, we had to clean up our rooms, the whole accommodation, because they had identified one person who had Corona, and we were quarantined for a period of 1 week. And during this period, we have a kitchen because we were sharing a kitchen. We had a communal kitchen, and they had told us we have to leave this kitchen open. So that time I was in the kitchen preparing my food, and this gentleman comes and he removed the table that was put on the door, and he closed the door. I asked him, why are you closing the door? Then he told me, I want to talk to you. I asked him, you mean you can't talk to me when the door is open? He said, no, I don't want my wife to see us. So he removed the table and then closed the door and then came closer to me. And he told me, Olivia, you refused me, but what I'm going to do, I will rape you. I told him, are you sure of what you're saying? He said, yes. I told him, but I have a roommate, you know it. He told me my roommate was working. So he told me, I will wait when your roommate has gone to work because she was working, and then I come into your room, and then I rape you from there. In these rooms, it used to be like warm, like hot. You can't close the doors. So most times we would leave the doors open. So I remembered this man can come in the room when I'm sleeping. Then I asked him, why are you so much into me? There are many women here. There are many women around here, even from your country. Then he said, I saw your private parts when you're sleeping. Your roommate opened the door and he saw me, and so he wants to see what is exactly in me. So I felt, I got scared that time, and by then I didn't know who can help me. What I did, I had to write to Yulia, to send a message to Yulia, because I had already explained to Yulia. Yulia works with the Letra. Then she told me, Olivia, talk to the person in charge of violence. By then, I did not know who she was. And I asked her, and she told me the person, and I knew this person before, but I didn't know what her work was in particular, because I only knew she dealt mostly with women and children. So I looked for this lady for close to 3 days before I got her. So when I got her, she told me, Olivia, they told me you've been looking for me. I told her, yes, I've been looking for you. Then she asked me, what is the problem? Then she got a room, and we sat there with her. I explained to her everything. I explained to her everything, what had happened before and what had happened. Like, I have not talked about what happened to me when I had just gone to this place. I had a lady. Okay, let me first finish this one, then I can talk about the other lady. Then I explained to her what has transpired, and then she said, Olivia, you are in danger. You can't stay in this place. So that is how she helped me to leave that place. But before, I had applied for a transfer through Letra and through my lawyer, and the government had rejected it. So I was not given the opportunity to transfer. So it was at this time, after explaining to this lady about my situation, that is when she told me, Olivia, you know what? Whether I lose my job or not, you're going to leave this place. So she told me, it was a Thursday, then the following day she told me, Olivia, tomorrow you have to leave this place. I'll go to the office in Munich. She was working with the Munich office. So she came to the office on a Friday. So I waited like up to 1. I did not receive her call. Then after like 30 minutes to 2, she called me and told me, Olivia, pack your things and leave this place. So that is how I left this place without a transfer or an official document to leave this place. So I moved to Munich, and I went to a place where I stayed for 2 weeks. Then in these 2 weeks, they told the government, told the social, because we were only 7 ladies in this place, and this place accommodated only ladies who had experienced violence. So they told us, the government has said, we cannot live here any longer. It wanted to use the accommodation for corona quarantine, like patients, people who were found with corona, yes. So that, then from there, I was moved to this place where I am currently. So when I came here, I am comfortable, but those are the challenges, although there are many, and with time, I can't say all of them.
Yeah. Olivia, thank you so much. Thank you so much for trusting us, sharing with us your story. I think it was already a very important first example, and we will elaborate that also later. We have a discussion session later again with all of you, where you can also bring another example. But I think it was already a very, very important first example, how important it is, for example, to have community counseling structures, to have people who believe in you and support you and listen to you, and organize support. And I think it's also a good way to hand over to Anbit now. Anbit, also from your side, maybe you can add on that, and maybe also say something about your work now at the moment, the experiences you made, but also your work now, because you're working now also in LGBTIQ violence protection program, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Daniel. And thanks, Olivia, for sharing your story. It was somehow a little triggering as well for me, because I've also faced physical violence in terms of also rape, and multiple times, more than once. And I think it's just probably that being a refugee or being a person of color, it makes the person feel that they have, I don't know, they can do things. It's just like, I mean, I hear a lot about experiences of queer refugees also through my work. And somehow it's also a balance between professional and personal life. At work, I'm working for Rubicon e.V. in Cologne for the Landeskoordinationsarbeit Anti-Gewalt, which is, we are doing anti-violence work from the Ministry of North Rhine-Westphalia for LGBTI person. There will, while talking about experiences today, probably I will bring some examples and stories from refugee camps where I provide qualification trainings as well for the employees. Coming to my personal experience, I must say that I have had a great opportunity to escape my country when I had to leave my country the most. Initially, when we started the panel today, there was a video shown, and there was this line that many people come to Europe for a better life. And sometime, let me tell you, it's crucial. It's not just better life, it's just crucial to live for these people, and they have to leave their country. And often it's not a decision that people like taking, because it's all uncertain. You don't know the country, you do not know the people, you do not know the culture, language, system, everything new. And you're put into an integration system, which is also not having understanding of the diverse culture who comes into the system, and having less regard. But you know, it's changing, it's getting better. And I will tell you my story, which has been rather a privilege, I would say, for me to get a visa to come to Germany and avoid having to apply for an asylum, which is a process I experienced through my work for Sojica Research, a European-wide comparative research on how to make the asylum procedure in Europe more just and fair. So I was an LGBTI activist in Bangladesh very early, I think around 16 years old, and very successful with what we were doing. We were able to change people's mind and convince that we all deserve to live our authentic selves and we all can love freely. Over the year, we got a lot of supporters, a lot of allies. At some point, it did trigger the Al-Qaeda Indian subcontinent in Bangladesh and the government in the same time, for which we had received a lot of personal threats, like threats to our person, like killing, and we didn't take them seriously until 2 of our colleagues got killed. I was half an hour late, trigger warning, it was a machete attack, and I was half an hour late. In Germany, it looked frowned upon to be late, and I could live until now. I had to leave my country immediately. I didn't want to leave my country, but Aktionsbündnis gegen Homophobie, the chairperson, Sören Landmann, was speaking with me every day on the phone, convincing me, Anbit, you have a reason to live, you have to leave the country. And thanks to all the organizations who made it possible for me to leave the country in a very immediate manner. I often did presentations about my story. It's empowering as well for other people to know that they also have a stake in supporting people who need to leave and they can do something. It took two governments to work together to bring me out of Bangladesh. I remember I often talked about three things like passport, airport, support. When I did presentation, I didn't have paperwork. I didn't have a passport to leave my country. Because it was not planned. I had to get a passport, very bureaucratic system. Remember going to passport office wearing a burqa because I didn't want to show my face, and also under stress and trauma. And somehow it took 1 month to get a passport, and then I applied for a visa, humanitarian visa, which was advised by back then a parliamentarian in Germany, to Aksin's Bündnis, to offer that support, because I didn't want to apply for asylum. I wanted to remain a Bangladeshi citizen, wishing to be able to come back to my country one day. And I went to the interview. Over the time, I sometimes look into the way of coming to Germany, and sometimes I think about there were some structural violence against me that I recognize now. So it was Ramadan. I went to the embassy. The person working for the embassy offered me a glass of water, and he looked at me and watched if I drink the glass of water or not. Now I think about it and be like, okay, probably he was checking if I'm Muslim or not. So, that you can be Muslim and you can be also a queer person, that's something that probably this poor employee didn't have in mind. Now I kind of think about it that way, and I didn't get a visa. He reported back to the embassy, the foreign ministry in Berlin, that it's not an important case. Then I didn't get the visa. Then United States Department of State actually had to involve in this lobby to get me here. I finally got my visa, came to Germany. Voila, Kölner Flüchtlingsrat told me, you got a jackpot. You don't have to go to refugee camp. You will have to find your own apartment, which I understand how difficult it can be if you don't have supporters who are from local community. I'm homeless since yesterday. Just telling everyone that, it's real. LGBTI person, young person of colors, they can be homeless. We need more safe houses. So it was quite easy. I had a community. I had Rainbow Refugee Support Group to support me. I was kind of a miracle for many people, and hope that there can be ways for people to come to Germany, come to a country with not having to go through much of a hassle. I had immediately access to my language course. I had immediately access to social funds for about 5 years. I only used them for 4.5 years. I have a job, part-time job now. I don't have qualifications from university because I had to drop out from university and had to learn this beautiful language, German. I like it, and all the things come along with it when you are surviving in this foreign country. It's not just housing, it's not just your integration course, it's also about your job, it's also about your education, it's about your opportunities. No? I mean, thanks for organizing this panel today from the Gleichstellungsamt of Heidelberg as well, that to really ensure justice, to really ensure equal opportunity and participation, you really have to look into individual level. Like Olivia talked about Olivia's experience, and you see the diversity of our experiences, but there's still struggle, there's still injustice that we have to fight for, and we're in this together. So I get back to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Anbit, for sharing your story with us, and also making already a perfect bridge to Menja, because you already mentioned so many issues, from anti-Muslim racism to forms of violence, terror, what it means actually to flee, that it's not only for a better life, but it's just also to survive, right? and to the challenges here that is still going on. Although you won so many awards and have a job, it's still so hard to there's still so much racism. So it's still so hard to find, for example, a flat for you. So Menja, handing over to you. In your project, you interviewed, worked closely together with Olivia and Anbit. I know that, but you interviewed so many other refugees and interviewed also so many other organizations working together with refugees. What did you learn in your project, and what can we learn from your project and from these experiences?
Well, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Ivan, for the invitation. I really appreciated to be here. And thank you, Ambit and Olivia, for opening up and really sharing very intimate and personal experiences. Throughout my research, which was a 2-year research project, I really had the privilege, I would say, to be in conversation with people like Olivia and Ambit, who have shared and trusted me and shared their personal experiences with me. And again, I had the privileges to work with them and also kind of think about ways in which we can come together and perhaps make a little dent, even if only very small, on different levels. And that brings me to the Queer European Asylum Network that I would like to briefly introduce to you, and our work that we all do together. I would like to mention that although I've been in my role as a researcher, someone who has worked on the forefront of the network, it was by no means just me who has founded it. It's really the work of all of us together, Daniel, Ambit, and also Olivia, with your contribution and with your openness and willingness to share your experiences with me. I think this really also pressed me as a researcher to become more active and become more collaborative also with different kinds of people who work, like Ambit as an activist, or Daniel as someone who is more in an institution, and how can we use these different forces and perspectives to kind of make a change, or at least launch a conversation around these issues. Let me share my screen here, and then can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I went wrong. Share. Okay.
Now, yes.
Yes, wonderful. All right. So very briefly, we from the Queer European Asylum Network, we are an umbrella organization, as mentioned before. We were founded in 2019. And as I have said before, the network brings together a lot of different stakeholders in the field of queer asylum. Amongst others, we have worked with, and Ambit is an activist, a human rights activist. We're working with researchers and academics. We're also working with people from equality offices such as Daniel. And our aim really is to engage a variety of people and stakeholders within the conversation. We had the privilege also to work with ILGA Europe, the Council of Europe, the EU Parliament, as well as a variety of different NGOs, more recently NGOs also from Eastern Europe, who are right now struggling with doing the work that they would like to do in Poland, Hungary, and Macedonia, for example. And as Ambit already has said, in terms of his own experiences as a researcher for Sojika, our aim is to kind of push towards a more inclusive asylum system that particularly also focuses on those persons who are located at the very margins in terms of their race, their sexuality, their gender, their ethnicity, as well as their class. We as a network, we have organized different events, mostly online, and also published policy reports on different topics. We have worked on COVID-19 and queer asylum. This was one of our first events that we did. And we have worked on the Istanbul Convention and queer women seeking asylum. This is particularly a topic that was brought close heart to me by Olivia, who, as you have heard, has experienced gender-based violence in her accommodation in Germany, but also lesbian women being constantly at risk of gender-based and sexual-based violence while, in their countries of origin, but also while traveling or while coming to Europe and then being in Europe. And we really think that there are legal frameworks in place that are often not implemented properly in practice. We have most recently also thought about queer asylum and the Dublin III return system, of what that means for people who identify as lesbian, gay, gender non-binary or intersex, bisexual, to be sent back to countries within the European Union that are not safe for them. And we're thinking particularly about Poland, for example, Hungary, and Macedonia. Poland, as you well know, hosts a lot of refugees right now from the Ukraine, amongst others also queer refugees who see themselves in precarious positions after having fled war and violence. And also, as alluded already by Olivia, we have thought about the challenges and focus on the challenges that particularly lesbian identifying women face when they're seeking asylum. The asylum system within the European Union is still based on the understanding and experiences, particularly of gay men. There has a lot of legislations have been passed within the last 10 to 15 years. But I would say, unfortunately, these legislations and efforts to streamline the asylum law and practice and be more inclusive for LGBTQI asylum claimants does not necessarily include the perspective of lesbian asylum claimants. And we're particularly also thinking about claimants who have families, who have children, who have been married back in their countries of origin, all reasons that that lead to a potential rejection, and while they're being read as being heterosexual persons rather than persons who engage with same-sex partners. The policy recommendations that we have framed as a network in collaboration with Policy Bristol at the University of Bristol, again, address obviously different subject areas. It's about the recognition of LGBTQI people who seek asylum within the common European asylum system, recognition also of the intersectionality. Ambit has already talked about that as well, in terms of how gender and sexuality, but also race, ethnicity, you talked about being a Muslim, how that kind of systemic violences and oppressions can lead ultimately to an exclusion of particular persons within the asylum system. Again, a recognition of particularly Black lesbian asylum claimants within Germany, but also elsewhere within the European Union. There is a lack of recognition of gender-based violence of LGBTQI asylum claimants. Again, particularly lesbian who claim asylums and who have experienced gender-based violence based on them being women, but also on them being homosexual, often are read either as being homosexual or as being women. So there is this kind of silo approach within the asylum system itself, and there is a need to bring these silos together and think about ways that women are not only oppressed because they're women, but also because they identify as non-heteronormative people. We have also worked on trauma and access to mental health support, which I think is a very important area of research, particularly for asylum claimants within Europe once they arrive. The recognition of extreme social isolation, something that Olivia has also talked about in terms of being housed with a lot of different people, but at the same time having to hide their sexuality and removing themselves socially from the larger, I wouldn't say community, but from other people who are currently going through the asylum system. We have also looked at how isolation and access to community and health support becomes particularly viable during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the key findings, and I'm just going to present them in different subjects. First, the reception when people arrive. How do we recognize that someone identifies as LGBTQI, particularly in a situation where people feel either afraid of coming out, they might feel shame of coming out, they don't feel safe, they don't know what to expect when they come out, fear of talking. So how do you approach that? How can we can we set up a system that is sensitive to these different kinds of identities that lead to marginalization? How can we establish safe accommodation in this regard? We have argued that there might be a good way if there's a system of early referrals and identification for LGBTQ asylum claimants and migrants, that they can identify themselves and therefore also being recognized as people who are in need of special services, particularly access to legal and social support. Another subject that has come up, or Ambit has already talked about this as well as Olivia, is housing. Again, refugees and people seeking asylum who identify as LGBTQI feel a heightened sense of loneliness and social isolation in shared accommodation facilities. There's also a heightened chance of them to experience gender-based and sexual violence. Due to that, some people they opt to move out of the accommodation system, become homeless. There is a heightened rate of homelessness among LGBTQI asylum claimants and refugees. As Ambit has alluded, that it's not easy to find something to live, even if you have a job. There is a lack of credentials, a lack of references. There is also homo and transphobia among landlords, for example, a lack of credit history. So there are different obstacles that present themselves in this context. And particularly for lesbians, again, who have experienced gender-based violence, is important for them to have and to have access to accommodations that provide them the safety that they need. In this regard, we have recommended that it would be good for LGBTQI persons to be assigned single rooms or special reception accommodation facilities where they're safe. We talk about safe spaces, ideally within urban areas and not rural areas. A lot of these accommodations, at least in Germany, are located in very rural areas. I think Olivia can talk to that, where it's very difficult to find legal and social support and access to LGBTQI groups, and to recognize that and take action. Again, there is the area of employment. As Olivia has said, it is for everyone not easy to find employment in a situation where they live in legal precarity. People have been out of the workforce for a prolonged period of time. The qualifications are either not there, as in the case of Ambit, or they are not recognized. They have to go and retrain, have to find different kinds of employment that not necessarily speaks to the employments they had in their countries of origin. Again, the experiences of racism, homo and transphobia within the employment sector is an issue that has come up a lot. So that's the case even if they have access to the employment market. And I know that every European country is different in this regard. In Germany, it does take about 1 to 2 years to even have access. In other countries, it might be faster or slower. But all these challenges can lead again to the likelihood of homelessness and poverty. So there is a heightened chance for LGBTQ asylum claimants and refugees to end up homeless and live in poverty. We would suggest that LGBTQ refugees should be paired, for example, with organizations that can support them in accessing the labor market and find employment, and provide letters of recommendations, which are really important, I believe, all over Europe. Another important area is healthcare and mental health. Like all refugees and asylum claimants, the violence and persecution experienced in the country of origin obviously creates trauma and mental health challenges. But again, we would like to remind ourselves that people who do not correspond with the heteronormative mainstream society might have additional forms of trauma, heightened forms of trauma, and mental health challenges in this context. So the healthcare systems within the EU are often not easily accessible for LGBTQ asylum seekers because they fear of being outed. A lot of people have mentioned that there is, that they have experienced homo and transphobia within these systems, that they have been asked questions that are not adequate and very intimate, that they don't feel safe, and they feel like they're being re-traumatized and they fear stigmatization. Very often the healthcare services are also not geared towards the needs of LGBTQI refugees and asylum claimants, particularly if they identify as being HIV positive, for example, or working as sex workers. So there is a lot of, on the one hand, it's stigmatization. On the other hand, it's the healthcare system that is per se not set up for non-heteronormative persons to begin with, and to kind of layer these two on top of one another. Exacerbates the marginalizations of LGBTQ asylum claimants and refugees. So it is therefore important that we improve the access to healthcare pathways for lesbian, bisexual, gay, trans, non-binary, and intersex person, and establish particular protection standards for LGBTQ asylum claimants, also in regards to their privacy and in regards to the disclosure of their sexual identity. So these are obviously just a very brief overview of some of the policy recommendations and areas that we have been working on. We have published so far 4 policy briefs and organized about 5 to 6 events that also touch upon these subject areas. So if you would like to kind of learn more about either the policy briefs or the events, we also have videos uploaded on our website. Please do visit our website, www.queereuropeanasylum.org. And with this, I close. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Menja. And I think with these very concrete policy recommendations, and I again posted the link to the policy briefs also here in the chat, I would say we can make a short break just to get maybe a cup of coffee or tea. And then we will have another half an hour for questions, for discussions, and we'll also look into it we'll discuss the opportunities, but also the challenges, and maybe also the dangers of voluntary work, of community work in the field of LGBTIQ refugee support here in Europe. So we meet again, let's say maybe in 5 minutes. Is that okay, Ivy? What do you think?
Yes, so let's meet maybe 5 before p30, so we can continue then.
Okay, so see you in 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Bye.
So we are waiting for just a minute. So, Anbit is also there. Fantastic. So welcome back, all of you. I think we had a very, very interesting, touching, and also very much needed discussion on the discriminations, the violence LGBTIQ refugees face in Europe, and what has to change. I want to thank all of you for your fantastic work you're doing and sharing with us your insights, because our program is also focusing on the role of volunteers. We would now also highlight this, but you all who are listening to us on Facebook or here in the Zoom, you can also ask questions in the chat, and Niels and Ivy can maybe take a look at it, and then in the second part you can also we will also address these questions. Okay, Ivy and Niels, you can just post it maybe in the chat and I can read it. But I would start maybe this time with you, Anbit. You are now working yourself in an LGBTIQ organization. LGBTIQ organizations, also volunteers, helped you come to Germany, helped you in your arrival to Germany. So community support was important for you, was needed, but at the same time, we know there are difficulties. There is, of course, there are power hierarchies. Could you say something about your experiences in that field?
Thank you very much. Very, very important question, Daniel. Sometimes my mother asks me, when will you stop working for LGBT rights? And I'm like, I hope soon we get everything what we want and we don't have to work anymore. And trust me, the LGBTI programming around the world is so underfunded. We don't have enough employees, but we have so much to do. I have empathy for all the organizations who work tirelessly in supporting not just local community, but also international community who have to flee their country and come here. And often we try to offer secure and supportive environment, but you know, when there is a failure, there is progress and opportunity as well. So often the time that is paid by the communal funds or the government funds from the ministries are not enough to pay for the individuals to aim that responsibility in supporting communities like LGBTI refugees, for instance. Then we need volunteers who will give their time. And it often relates to having a privilege, or I would say protection, when you have the funds necessary to pay your bills and also have free time to give in the contribution of this collaborative journey we are having. Often we're not trained. We don't have sometimes a background of or knowledge, having studied or going through Fortbildung or trainings or such. This is my responsibility, not for Westphalia, to provide qualification trainings, to support structures, not necessarily always volunteers, but also government structures in refugee camps or, for instance, different institutions providing support or service, I would say, to LGBTI refugees. That could be job center, Ausländerbehörde, city Verwaltung, for instance, like civil servants, therapists, security, medical support, for instance, lawyers, therapists. I said therapists twice because mental health is something that we need to really address here. And often access to mental health is also something that is very challenging, and we don't have it immediately when we need it. From my experience, I would say sometimes, we do mistakes. We all have our own prejudices that we learn from our culture, from our family, from our upbringing, from our socialization. We do mistakes. We are somehow racist, I must say. It's ingrained in our system. The structures are built in that way. And we forget often that refugees who come here are not only people of color, but we also have refugees from Russia. We also have refugees from Ukraine. Recently, I heard stories from people from Texas applying for refugee status in Germany. This is the situation globally, right? And over there, we have seen this discourse that there is this, in German, we say Doppelmoral in terms of providing support. We have many apartments available, rooms available for people to find their accommodation if they're leaving from Ukraine, which is a great thing. But it is an opportunity for our larger community to take this opportunity to learn that we have a room available when someone needs it, not necessarily from Ukraine, but also from other places. And that depends on the trust. I remember when I came to Germany, I was offered accommodation. The only thing that the persons didn't trust me, which that if I would successfully burn the kitchen. So I had a Versicherung for that. So, so I think trust is really important, but also when we have prejudices, when we work together with refugees, we have to be very careful. We need to look for support that is available. We need to attend events like this to hear about how we can better support the vulnerable group. Because one mistake can be really damaging for a person's life. Like we have heard stories, Daniel, and everyone here, we have heard stories about sexual misconduct, for instance, like sexual assault within the structures which supposed to support queer refugees. We have heard, I was told when I arrived in 2016, young me, 20 years old, probably much more lucrative and attractive than right now. But someone was telling me, like, you know, marry me, I will get you a passport. And you know, that time I just felt so lucky that I didn't have to worry about my court hearing, that if I will have a chance to stay in Germany or not. And over there, I also experienced from court hearings in Frankfurt, for instance, or in Arnsberg, that sometimes having a boyfriend really helps. And often it is, unfortunately, then very dependent on your existence. Like, to exist, to survive, you have to have a certain expectations to fulfill. And that goes on beyond with many other things. I mean, we still have many LGBTI activists who are refugees, have to work for free, all of their time they have to give for free, and still on job center, not getting jobs. And it's like a self-help group, like you have to do it for yourself because it's your right. But I think as a community, we also need to create spaces for refugees who can attain jobs and can do it their best. So this is my short take on this, Daniel. I'm getting back to you.
Thank you so much, Anbit. I think you already, again, made very valuable points, and I would also like to get back to you later to learn more about the content of the trainings for volunteers and for organizations. So what exactly you are teaching, if you could give us there a few insights. But I would now also would ask Olivia. Olivia, what did it mean for you? Because we don't have that many in Germany, to have like a lesbian organization, you know, who is focusing on lesbian refugees also as a support. Did you have the feeling there was more trust, more care? Were there volunteers who were more connected to your stories? Did you have the feeling the support, it helped you that you have a lesbian organization supporting you? Was this important for you in your process? Can you talk a little bit about that? And also, I mean, if you made also in the process with volunteers positive experiences, negative experience, just share your experiences with people working together with you here in Germany.
Okay, thank you so much. On my arrival, like, I didn't know anything about German. I couldn't speak the language. And in the accommodation where we were staying, there were social offices, but I didn't know how I could be helped. And when I went for my interview, I went as in solo. I went alone. I did not have any organization that would support me because I didn't know of any. And when I was at my interview, they asked me, have you gotten in touch with any LGBTIQ organization? I told them no. And then they had to write for me on a piece of paper. And that is how I got to know about LETRA. So after my interview, I went to the website and I got LETRA's email address, that info email address, and I wrote to them, but I did not get any response that time. That was after my interview. Not until after I had got my feedback, and then the Caritas had to get for me a lawyer, of which the lawyer wanted, at that moment, she wanted 250 euro, of which I did not have. But good enough, this lawyer was lenient. She accepted to write for me an appeal back to the government. And then she also asked me if I had gotten in touch with any LGBTIQ or lesbian organization. I told her I tried to get in touch with the LETRA, but I did not get any response. So she gave me a flyer, and she gave me an address and told me, go to this address. It is the that is where you'll find this organization. So I went to this place and it led me to SOB. SOB is for gay men. So when I reached this place, they told me, Letra is not here. Then they directed me, and then they told me, but you have to call them or write them an email, then you can book an appointment. And I remembered I already wrote to them and I never got any response. Will I still be helped? So I had to go back to my lawyer, and then she had to book for me an appointment, and that is how I got in touch with Letra. But when I got in touch with Letra, like, I felt at home because they connected me. I had to get in touch with other lesbians who are from my country. And that is how, like, I felt at home. Yeah. So initially,
And so after you were had the first appointment at Letra, of course you said already, I think the support between, for example, also lesbian refugees from your home country, of course, is important, right? Like peer support, friendships, and everything. It's very important. But maybe now the working together with Letra or volunteer there, what are your impressions? What did help the most being part of Letra?
okay. The biggest part of Letra that it does, it helps us to get lawyers when you like approach. Then they also help with the counseling, individual counseling if you if you have challenges, and then they can connect you, like if you have a psychological problem or trauma, doctors. We usually have get-togethers, and Letra also like links you to Fleet, which is the Ugandan, mostly Ugandans are in this group, but then we also have Nigerians and Kenyans and Tanzanians, but those ones are few. The majority are Ugandans. So we come together in this group, and then we discuss, we chat, we have fun. So like you feel at home, like you're at home. But remember, you still have the other problem. I'm not yet settled. How will I be helped? Like those who have doldrums, those who are to be like deported. Yeah, Letra helps a lot.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And I think what you already became clear when you talked about you trying to get access to that organization is that we know that often these kind of mostly volunteer run or underfunded LGBTIQ organizations are, of course, then overwhelmed when so many, for example, when so many refugees at the same time write mails, look for help. And we know that from many organizations, then suddenly there's just too much work, you know, and they cannot really follow up, and it's really hard to answer all the mails, and we know that from for example in Germany after what happened in 2015. Menja, could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that? What did you learn from the interviews you did with LGBTIQ organizations, the volunteers maybe there, and what can be done better, and what maybe there was also a question in the chat that could be answered by also maybe by you, Menja, and you, Anbet, how we can filter volunteers. You know, what volunteers have to learn, for example, regarding power balances, regarding trauma, and so many other topics. How would an education of volunteers would have to look like in that field?
Thank you, Daniel. I think personally, or not just personally, but I think the concept of volunteerism is quite complicated and a difficult one, I would say. I mean, going back to 2015 with the welcome culture in Germany proclaimed by Angela Merkel back then, you know, people were really wanting to help because they feel like the suffering inflicted on Syrian people was just not right and not fair. But then the Syrian people came, people of color. These are people mostly who are identifiable and racialized as Muslims, the majority. There were several instances in Germany where there were attacks against women who were then accredited to you know, Syrian refugees, which turned the tide in Germany from a welcome culture to a culture that is very critical towards the integration of refugees in more generally. And I think it's that racial bias and the ways in which we as a society, and when I think about we, I mostly talk about the EU, you know, frame deservingness, frame fragility, frame harm and pain. So this is something that came out of my research, the ways in which people who are very like me, similar positionalities, grew up in a relatively safe environment. You know, we have a white privilege. The traumas are different. The recognition of these traumas, I think, is not always easy. We are very easy to fall into the traps of what Ambit has said, of prejudice and stereotypes that we all bring with us, regardless. And I think it's important for volunteers or for researchers like myself to kind of critically reflect, where are we in this larger system of power relations? What is our role, and to what extent are we actually reproducing some of the systemic violences inflicted on persons of color and persons who live in legal precarity? And I think I would also, in this context, mention the role of government. I think it is also important that we recognize as volunteers and researchers and societies in general that a lot of the laws that we right now have in countries, or in sub-Saharan countries, in some countries in South Asia, are actually laws that have been imported by the French and the British. These anti-homosexuality laws have not existed prior to colonialism. And obviously these are laws that are right now, you know, they have a coming back, I would say. Political climates are in a way that are very detrimental for the safety of LGBTQI persons in these areas, in these regions, but also remind ourselves that we are going to, you know, we're heading in a similar trend in Europe as well, to kind of think about ways in which political power works in this regard, imperialism. So when we think about volunteers and jumping on the opportunity to help people who come from backgrounds that are very, very different from ours, I think we do have, and that's Ambit's role, as I understand, remind ourselves constantly where we stand within the larger political and societal power dynamics, in order to not tap into the same into the same challenges or reproduce these power dynamics and that are very detrimental for the safety of LGBTQI persons. And I think, and I close with this, this comes also with recognizing our own very westernized understandings of homosexuality and gender identity, for example. That's something that within asylum processes, and Olivia is unfortunately has experienced this, not being seen or not being read as someone who's vulnerable, as someone who needs protection, as someone who is a victim. And I think when we come with these lenses that we obviously are trained in how we look at the world, it's important to recognize that these lenses have limitations and that we have blind spots, and to really focus on these blind spots. And also, as Ambit has said, it's a learning opportunity, but not just take the harm of others as our own learning opportunity. Yes.
Ambit, I would just hand over to you, just to say something a little bit maybe about something concrete about what volunteers also would need to learn from your perspective.
Beautifully said, Manja. Thank you very much for putting all the words together. It's just like, yeah, thank you. I take notes for my own work as well, because I feel that often people who are giving a lot of time, either being low paid in working for refugee camps or not paid at all. I feel that there is this lack of feeling like a fulfillment, like you feel that you are doing something good and you are appreciated. That's sometimes is missing. That's lacking in social work, because it's underfunded, for instance, right? And often it's really important to for my clients to look into themselves and then recognize that how they themselves experience structural, cultural, and even personal violence in their own personal life, in their own work, the structure they work in, for different intersectional challenges. Because, you know, I work with people who are Muslim. I work with people who are themselves second generation or first generation migrants, themselves having to learn a new language and having barriers, themselves not being appreciated or having obstacles within their structure, knowing that this could have been better if this had happened, but my boss doesn't want it, you know? So to be able to recognize that, then you also feel that you are also part of the hope that we have, that we want to get there where there is social justice, there where we don't have any more. Apologies, my colleague's phone is buzzing, but so over there, the really key is to make people aware that we all go through some sort of injustice in our life. And when we work together, it is not that because I'm greater. Yeah? Someone recently told me, oh, Anbid, I want to do some voluntary work because I'm so privileged. And that perspective should be gone. You know, you shouldn't be doing something because you're privileged. You should do something because you care, because you want to fight against the unjust. And that something gives you kind of, it's a noble work, I think, for myself as well. I feel very noble about, you know, to be able to contribute to this. And often it's also important to not think that you are helping someone. If you're being paid, then you are really giving the service. I mean, I called up Job Center when I received this Rosa Courage Prize, and I asked, would you please like to come to the award ceremony? Because I'm really pleased with the service you provided to me. And this is really a service. It's a taxpayer money put together for the service needed to be provided to people like me, people like Olivia. And if you fail, then you're failing your mandate. And that's really, I think that's the key, that, you know, refugee structures or refugee camps or consultants, they are not helping us, they're doing their job. And when it comes to volunteers, we need to have a culture of value. We need to have a culture of appreciation for the work is put together, the time put together. And that's why I think it's really important that we create more job opportunities as well for these structures. And filtering is one of the things that, I mean, I don't want people to be filtered out. If someone wants to support and they need additional support to make themselves prepared to provide services or provide guidance, or, you know, in German we say Begleitung, for instance, then there is the support possibility available. And we don't want to filter people. We want people to feel free and feel comfortable to come to us and say, I need to learn this. I need to work with you, or I have this question and I'm afraid to ask someone. Can I ask you this? And be fehlerfreundlich, like you have to be not judgmental and just help that person say, oh, do this way. And also, Beschwerden is something really important that I learned from my integration in Germany, that people should feel comfortable to come to you and say, I have had this experience and I'm not feeling well about it, that they are able to come to you. And building that trust is really necessary in voluntary spectrum. And never defend yourself, just listen, go back, reflect, and come back again to the person. That's how it should be done. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. Olivia, Anbid, Mentor, for first of all, for your amazing work you're doing, and for your political work, highlighting what's wrong in the system, the discriminations LGBTIQ refugees are facing, the especially the discrimination or the Black lesbian refugees are facing, Olivia, for opening up today, for sharing your knowledge, giving us your time, giving us your expertise, presenting your research. I think it was a very, very important conversation here in the part of this project. We learned, I learned again a lot. I hope you all learned a lot today. And I would hand over for the final words to Ivy again.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel, for moderating today's session. And thank you also from my side to all the speakers. As this is the final of our 14 webinars, I think it really was important to have you at the end to, like to let this topic stay and to make people also think about all the things that you shared even after our webinar session. The Embrace partners in the room already know that next week in Heidelberg in the Living Lab, we will continue to work on these topics. So for us, this is only a starting point. And before I close now the Rethinking Integration webinar series, I want to thank our ECHAR team member Niels, because Niels was organizing the webinar series now for the last several months. And I think he really did a great job, because organizing a series of more than 14 webinars, trying to be aware of who do we give space, what topics do we mention, how can we actually rethink what is happening while still being part of such a system. So I think, Niels, you had a very challenging task, and thank you very much for the effort. I think it was definitely worth it. And thank you all for coming. You will find the webinars and the outcomes on the Embrazen website, probably from July on. So whoever wants to recap or, I don't know, watch the webinar again can do that. All the participants that registered are on our Embrazen newsletter, so you will receive from us a link with all the information on where to find and where you can access the webinars. With that, I thank you all for joining, and I wish you a great afternoon.